Welcome to the Old Ones Inn. Now, grab a brew and let's start this episode in an interesting and nice way. We're going to talk about Age of Sigmar. I'm not a big fan of Age of Sigmar. I don't really like its lores. Some of the models are okay, but lore-wise, it's not Warhammer Fantasy, it's not Warhammer 40k, it's not Lord of the Rings. So, with that out of the way, we're going to talk about something that I find interesting. And we'll be talking about Eternus. Yes, Eternus, the blade of the first prince. His lore is pretty interesting, mostly because he was one of Archon's vanguard, until he was like, yeah, you know what, I'm not really that willing to serve you anymore. And then he got struck by lightning and sent into the Cursed Sky. What the Cursed Sky is basically a sky, of course, it's in the name, right? How awful is that? It's a sky that does not let the Stormcast Eternal to be revived. Don't think of it as when that sky is on, the Stormcast Eternals are just dead. They can't revive anymore. They can, but the Cursed Sky stops them from reaching Azir and being reforged. Thus, they're technically dead, but not really. So this Eternus guy gets hit into the Cursed Skies, and he's there and left to suffer with the purity of the souls of all the Stormcast Eternals, because they can never do a bad thing. He gets burned because of that, and at some point, Be'lakor, the first Demon Prince of Chaos, the Dark Master as he's also known, grabs his soul, and thanks to all the scarring and everything he suffered thanks to the Stormcast Eternals, he just combines everything. Be'lakor combines the soul of Eternus with the other Stormcast Eternals he had to share the suffering with, and he creates the Eternus we now have as a model, the first blade of the Dark Prince, or the first Prince, whatever it was. And honestly, this is pretty cool. It's an interesting aspect of lore. Of course, it doesn't come close to anything else we have, but that's besides the point. It is interesting and it is nice, and we get a little glimpse of the Stormcast Eternals falling to chaos. And that's very interesting because the Stormcast Eternals and the Primaris seem to be these poster boys, these golden boys that can do nothing wrong and they are perfect. And if anything bad happens to them, woe and hatred comes to the heads upon those that do that to them. Because we also have the example with, I guess, a crusade of Black Templars deciding they don't want Primaris, butchering them, and then kind of being gone or, killed off because of that. And I don't really like that. I think the Primaris and the Stormcast Eternals should suffer. They should suffer as much as anybody else in those worlds. Now, some might say that the Stormcast Eternals manage to suffer in a different way. They suffer because every time they are reforged, well, they lose part of their humanity, part of their soul, and they become more cold, more jaded, more unhuman-like. And that's interesting and all, but it's still not proper enough to see the failings of the Stormcast Eternals. Like, for example, you would see in the band of the Imperium or Bretonia, when they fall to chaos, it's pretty much thanks to their own hands. We also have a nice example with Kislev in Total War Warhammer 3 in the tutorial aspect, where you play as a Prince of Kislev and you fall to chaos. You become the Demon Prince that you can play as later on. And that's interesting. It's interesting to see the fallings of these characters who start out with good intentions and end up bad because chaos is an all-corrupting force that destroys everything in its path. It's an evil force. The Stormcast Eternals and the Primaris don't have to suffer from this because for some reason, narrative-wise, they are perfect embodiments of what they should be. And I think that hurts them in a way. For example, when you compare Primaris with normal Space Marines can fall. They have fallen before numerous times during the Horus Heresy and before that. Primaris, not so much. They more likely suffer from their own stupidity, as it has been proven in that whole story where the Custodes and the Sisters of Silence kill them. Still, still, there's at least a point where they fall to their own stupidity. The Stormcast Eternals get kind of screwed, but they don't have any personal flaws that you can really exploit and turn them to chaos. Now, I know I'm an Imperial player. I like the Empire, I like Bretonia, I like Space Marines, but I think it's important to have chaos as this thing that can corrupt, that can move things forward. With Eternus, it's a good starting point because all those Stormcast souls are kind of forced to be part of chaos, and that's good, but it's just not the proper step into having Chaos Stormcast Eternals, Sigmarines. You don't have Chaos Sigmarines, you're not really getting there, you know? You need to have these forces that can get easily corrupted and everything. Of course, some may say that, oh, that doesn't happen with the dwarves or the elves or anything like that, but in Warhammer Fantasy, at least it made sense while the... What am I trying to say? It made sense that the elves did not fall to Slaanesh, or to chaos in general. The dwarves were basically all but immune to magic of any sorts, and thus they could not fall to it, even if they wanted to. But they did not see the reason to do it. Interesting, because chaos presumes and shows itself as giving you the option of choice, giving you the possibility of making your own decision. As forced as that decision may be, most people fall into it willingly. The same can be, this is another good example. The same can be said with the people that get the mark of the outsider in the Dishonor world. He gives you that thing, but it's your choice what to do with it. Though the outsider seems to be more neutral compared to the chaos forces and the chaos gods. Nevertheless, this point with Eternus is an interesting start to where the story could go with the Stormcast, with the Sigmarines. Yeah, going back to Eternus, Eternus at some point rejoins Archaon's army and tries to subvert it alongside Chaos Legionnaires to bring the downfall of the Three-Eyed King and usher in Be'lakor as the rightful leader of the Apocalypse. Which is interesting. There's an internal Chaos civil war, which is always good and nice to have, because that is the nature of chaos, to work against its own interests most of the times. So that makes it interesting. And Eternus is a pretty good starting point for a story you can tell about the corruption of pure beings. Of course, we have the Banzium Warcry, which are very interesting and nice to have. I don't know any piece of lore for them, but hopefully we'll solve that at some point. It's still pretty interesting to have that, and it's going into a nice place with it. I hope we see more on the fall of the Stormcast, the Sigmarines, and the Primaris, because that would help build them up more. One of the biggest things that makes Blood Angels attractive to Blood Angels players, trust me, I'm a big fan of the Blood Angels, is the fact that the Blood Angels can fall. And it's not to chaos that's the biggest problem. They fall to their own genetic flaws or psychic flaws. And that says a lot. That puts a bunch of emphasis on it and the tragedy of the Blood Angels. Now, for Primaris Blood Angels, we know they can also fall to them. It's been confirmed. It worked. Reforging their gene and making it perfect worked as well as the Cursed Founding did for the Lamenters. So, you know. But it's still interesting to have that aspect. And Eternus is and can be the right step forward to showing the flaws of these perfect factions, these perfect creatures. Because in the end of the day, it works and it can make them more tragic in a sense, because they too can fall to chaos. Now, of course, I don't expect the Sigmarines to benefit from this, the Sigmarines to get this. And that is, in my opinion, something that works against them. It works against them because all the story and potential you can have with normal Space Marines and with the Empire factions, the human factions like Bretonia or the Empire, it just goes to waste thanks to the Sigmarines. At the end of the day, when you have, a Sigmarine against a Demon Prince of Chaos, well, the Sigmarine can just get revived and come back to fight once more, basically getting an infinite continue cheat. Normal Great Swordsmen from the Empire or Bretonian Knights don't really have that. Neither do the normal Space Marines. And I think that's interesting and works, and at least at this point, it applies to the Primaris. But I've said this is going to be about Eternus, and I've talked about Eternus. He's trying to subvert Archon and bring in his master to his rightful place. Again, Eternus represents this concept of the possibility of moving the story forward and having something good at the end of the day, having something interesting in that point. But I guess we'll have to see how things evolve. I know Eternus was launched in September, but again, I don't really care much for Age of Sigmar, for its lore especially. But this is an interesting point. This is an interesting thing that I enjoy and I like. And I hope we get more stuff like Eternus in the future. It will be interesting, and I think it would help with the setting as well, because I don't give that much hope to Age of Sigmar to do as well once Warhammer the Old War launches. And that's gonna be a pretty big test for both Warhammer the Old World and Age of Sigmar if they can continue and they can be successful. Those Dominion boxes, those FOMO boxes, are still available in Romania, quite frankly. The one with the weird orcs. Whatever. Still, Eternus is a nice point, and it's a nice point that if developed more upon, can help Age of Sigmar survive the rebirth of the old world, and can pretty surely bringing something new to the setting, something that will revitalize it and will probably get more people interested in it. But that's been all. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you in the next one.